Welcome everyone to this webinar today on gender intelligent design. I think people will keep coming in, but we'll get going in the interest of time. My name is Katie Hyatt. I am the digitally enabled financial inclusion lead at FInEquity. Over the next 90 minutes, we're going to be discussing what gender intelligent design means and what the journey looks like to get there. So I'll talk you through I'll talk you through some of FInEquity's resources about gender intelligent design, how we're thinking about it and approaching it. We've had 3 webinars to date on this theme, looking at consumer protection, looking at heuristics, and also looking at savings groups. This is going to be a little bit different in that it will be interactive in part. So first of all, I'll discuss some of our resources, and then we're going to have a couple of specialists in the field talk to you about their own work in gender intelligent design. So Ines Murray from Financial Alliance for Women and Ella Moffat of RISE. We'll have a short opportunity afterwards to ask them questions. So if you have any questions, they go in the chat. And then we will have about half an hour for a piece of interactive group work. And we'll give you more instruction and tell you more about that when that time comes to that. In an ideal world, we'll have a bit of an opportunity to report out before we close. This may be this is assuming that we run to time, which is often a big assumption. But that is the run of play for today. And thank you all so much for joining. A few housekeeping issues or housekeeping points. Please introduce yourself in the chat, where you're calling in from. Feel free to share your LinkedIn and connect with each other. And please use it to ask questions for our panelists. So Annika, if we could move to the training resources slide. When financial products and services are designed for women, they are pitched as gender neutral often. So the idea that we're offering everyone the same experience regardless of gender. But given the historical likelihood that these products and services were conceptualized and built by men, there is a real risk that they are not gender neutral, but gender blind. Around a year ago, FInEquity, in partnership with USAID, developed a knowledge guide around gender intelligent design. And we'll share this knowledge guide in the chat, but essentially it's segmented into 3 sections. The first, and it's not an exhaustive list, it's a compilation of resources that were all peer reviewed and considered the most useful in addressing different components of gender intelligent design. And so we've segmented this into 3 sections. Why design for women? Really targeted at financial service providers and other stakeholders who are looking for evidence and examples of why it's important and what the business case looks like. The second segment is around segmentation and user research. And this includes lots of how to do it resources, working papers, case studies, programmatic assessments that demonstrate how to break your audience down and understand the different wants and needs of different parts of the audience. So finally, the third section is around principles and methodologies. And this is looking at how, offering guidance as to how we use these resources through toolkits, principles, insights, resources such as the Gates D3, digitized direct design framework. So there's a load of resources in there. And I will say, if you have other resources that you think should be included in this, we welcome further inclusion of resources that are focused on gender intelligent design. So if we could just move to the next slide on the spectrum of design, Annika. Financial products and services that are based on men's assumptions and realities are unlikely to resonate with and serve women's needs. as the well-known saying goes, one size all actually means one size fits men. And often the approach to gender intelligent design, or gender, designing for women, is this concept of shrink it and pink it, which is, if it weren't offensive and reductive, it would be funny. But I'm harking back to memories of pink pens and phones, etc. And in fact, I recently met with a mobile operator, and they are trying to understand why their phone ownership is not increasing in the country where they work. And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when they said to me, we bought a lot of pink phones, and it didn't. We discounted them, but it just didn't work. So it's still very much a thing that people think might work. But gender intelligent design uses data to understand women's preferences and behaviors, and based on that data, create products and services that reflect, resonate with women's lives. So you can see here, we've thought about gender intelligent design through this, or designing for women through the spectrum of thinking about, gender blind, where you're intentionally ignoring the differences that between men and women around financial services. And then there's gender aware, where you understand that there are differences, but you design around them. So you're not necessarily trying to change anything. You're making small inroads. And then there's gender intelligent, which is starting with the data to understand and overcome the barriers to women's financial inclusion. So last year, FInEquity wrote a few case studies on organizations that have really successfully deployed gender intelligent design in their products and services. You may have heard Marie Mintalucci speak on one of our webinars before. She's the founder of WOMENSAVE, which is a nonprofit in Uganda, which is focused on goal-based savings. So there's about 5 million unbanked women in Uganda, which is a big segment given that the population is 45 million. And WOMENSAVE offers financial literacy training, financial advisory, and goal-based savings. And really offering these services with giving women the agency to define their own financial goals, and meeting them where they're at and working with them to understand what their interests are and where they're looking to invest. So there were a number of research findings that came that they actually took those specific findings and they turned them into a design element. And one of the big barriers to women saving, so say you have Callan over here on the right, and she was saving for a new door and windows for her house. And so that, the best laid plans and all, if there is a financial shock, that is going to dig into those savings plans. So what WOMENSAVE did is they incorporated an emergency fund along with the goal-based saving. The second thing they realized is that they couldn't train as often the traditional way of training, classroom training, because women just didn't have that time to give. So they reduced their trainings to 1 to 2 hours and ensured that the format modules that they needed to complete could be done over several weeks. Mobile money was still new, and like most people, I don't learn a new thing in one sitting. And so they developed after the training, they developed a refresher model so that women could come back to it, and they could also consult with their loan officers, etc. And finally, this was a very new concept, the idea of saving for a specific, having a savings goal. And so WOMENSAVE gave every client a savings officer to help them, to work with them to define a savings goal, understand their budget, and then design a savings plan, an emergency fund with terms and conditions that worked for them. The second case study I wanted to look at was Women's Microbank in Papua New Guinea. Now, Women's Microbank is also known as Mama Bank. and they are a woman-owned bank. When the central bank gave them their license, they were only given the opportunity to open one physical branch initially. But because Papua New Guinea is just an incredibly rural, 87% rural country, and a country which has very low levels of literacy, very low mobile phone penetration, and minimal, only 20% of the country has an ID. So they created these access points in the markets in PNG and paired up with UNCDF to look at a biometric solution to addressing some of these challenges. So one thing that they realized very quickly and knew was going to be a barrier is that women did not have formal ID and they had low levels of literacy. So they introduced these biometric scanners and using fingerprints. And this meant that a woman could open a bank account without a mobile phone, without an identity. They were given a passbook, but the passbook was more for the woman's benefit. They didn't need the passbook for any of their transactions, but it made the bank account more tangible for the woman. She could choose not to have one, not to take it home, not to have evidence of her bank account, but it was there. Another challenge was, given that only 15% of the country is on the electricity grid, there was a lot of disruptions in transactions, which was very eroding to women's confidence. So they, in WMBL, programmed an automatic operator switching. So the biometric machines, as they were processing data, they could switch between the two mobile operators, and they also enabled offline processing. So that they could continue the processing or complete the processing when the biometric machine went back to the bank itself, headquarters. Lending costs are very high. And so UNCDF worked with WMBL, giving them a credit guarantee. And this meant that WMBL could extend more loans to more women and without deposit requirements. And finally, these women in the market, they were, gardeners. They were sometimes selling the produce that they grew in their own garden, sometimes, working with a cooperative. But when they came to market, their fingers were often swollen. And so taking 2 fingerprints was not enough to, their prints were compromised. And the biometric reader couldn't process the prints, and so they increased the number of prints from 2 to 10, and this created a lot of extra data points that they could then use to triangulate the identity of the customer. I will skip over our third case study because I want to attempt to keep us on track, but I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Ella Moffat, and some of you might know Ella from previous webinars. When she was focused on her finance under her project, digitizing garment workers' payments in Bangladesh. She is the manager of financial health for RISE, which sits under BSR, or BSR is a part of RISE. That is more correct. And BSR is a sustainable business network and consultancy, which is focused on creating a world in which people can thrive on a healthy planet. And then we're going to hear from Inez Murray, who is the CEO of Financial Alliance for Women, which I'm sure you're all very aware of. Had some very, very good reporting coming out, and a report that came out last month on data for women's financial inclusion that we'll be sharing in the chat. Financial Alliance for Women is a members network of financial organizations dedicated to championing the female economy. So without further ado, we will start with Ella. And once Ella and Inez have spoken, we'll have a little bit of time for people to answer questions. So please do put your questions in the chat. Okay, over to you, Ella.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katie, and for inviting me to speak in this webinar today. So Annika, if you could go to the next slide, please. So just to explain, so RISE is this brand new organisation which was launched in March and stands for Reimagining Industry to Support Equality and aims to support women working in global supply chains. And RISE brings together BSR's Her Project, ILO's Better Work, GAP's PACE programme and Care International, which are one of the largest organisations working on global garment supply chains. And so individually, we've supported 5 million workers, which is amazing. But together, we can be greater than the sum of our parts, which is why it's really exciting that we've come together under this new collaboration, RISE. And RISE works on 3 interconnected priorities: financial health, prevention of gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace, and women's advancement and leadership, which all draw on the experience and expertise of the founding partners. So as Katie said, I'm the financial health manager at RISE, and so I'm going to focus on our financial health work today. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So RISE pursues its mission through 3 core strategies. So we work on capacity strengthening of workers and managers. So for example, our financial health and digital workplace training, which I'll talk more about in this presentation. We look at market transformation and to really embed gender equality into business practice. For example, that can be through wage digitization that considers the financial health of female workers. And we look at influencing, to influence industry and public policy to scale initiatives and address the barriers. For example, to developing the financial ecosystem so that women, when they're paid into accounts, will be able to use those accounts and benefit from them. And our work is informed by data, evidence and learning that really puts women at the centre so that we can really understand and support their needs and avoid any unintended consequences. If you go to the next slide, please. And so the RISE financial health programme is based on Her Finance, which was developed in 2012 and has been delivered in 189 garment factories in 7 countries, including Bangladesh, Cambodia, Egypt, and has supported over 340,000 workers, of which the majority have been women. And this programme supports men and women to access, use and benefit from financial products and services, including payroll accounts, and builds their money management skills. So looking at financial planning, budgeting, saving, and very importantly, increasing their agency over their wages. And we also provide advice to managers as they plan, prepare and deliver the transition from cash to digital wages, or if they already digitized, then supporting them to link to relevant local financial service providers and services and government employee benefit schemes. So when we design our programs, we follow have the following steps. So first of all, it's really important to consult both men and women workers on their financial needs, barriers and their attitudes. This is really foundational. And it's really important to include men because then we can compare their experience with women's experience. We define our program objectives, putting women at the center. So all of our goals and KPIs consider and measure women and men's financial needs, capabilities and decision making. Even though the majority of women workers in global supply chains are women, if we're not deliberate in targeting them, then we might not reach them. It's really important to get buy-in from key stakeholders. So for us, we work through global brands and buyers because they're the entry point into the supply chain. And then they work with them to convince their suppliers to join the program. And then we also work with financial service providers because they need to be convinced to develop this low-income worker market segment and to really understand the barriers for the women customers. Often they think of low-income workers as being the same. We also need to ensure gender sensitive training delivery because our training is as good as the trainers who deliver it. So we make sure that we build the trainers' capacity on addressing gender norms because they may be accepting of them because they live with those norms, and using gender sensitive participatory training methods to really encourage women's involvement in the training and not to sit quietly at the back because our training is for both men and women. So it's really important to make sure that the women will be engaged and feel comfortable to participate. And finally, on this list anyway, is being adaptive. So we continuously get feedback from women to make changes to the programme as needed and share their feedback and challenges with the key stakeholders so we can find ways to address them during the programme. So if you go to the next slide, please, Annika. So going a little bit deeper into our financial needs research. So we have focus group discussions and key informant interviews with men and women workers at the start, the middle and the end of the programme. We conduct a range of interviews with key stakeholders, including managers, brands, financial service providers, industry organisations, local NGOs, basically anybody who is involved in that local ecosystem, so we can really understand it as best we can. We conduct worker surveys in every factory we work in with at least 50 workers, of which half are women, at the baseline and end line. And then we do gender reviews by a local external consultant to help us make sure that we're really understanding what's happening for women and getting their feedback. And the key areas that we look at are financial inclusion, so the access and use of financial products and services, including the payroll accounts, financial health, so looking at financial planning, saving, borrowing habits, and confidence to meet expected and unexpected costs, and control over wages, so that financial decision making and the agency on spending and saving. And so kind of set out a few kind of insights that we have. So first of all, as I mentioned, we collect feedback from both men and women, which helps us to understand the context for women and also how to engage men as allies, which is really important. Financial needs and opportunities can change over time. So we need continuous engagement to really understand that. So for example, we have a program in Egypt where we've kind of discovered a new challenge where in order to avoid being charged to get a statement, you need an email address and a smartphone. And actually, particularly for women, they may not have that, especially email addresses. And so then they're getting charged for just to receive a statement. As I mentioned, working with M&E and gender experts is really important as well, gives us kind of that additional new perspective and insights. We've worked closely with microfinance opportunities, with MicroSave and with CARE, for example, on this, and that's always been really, really helpful. As Katie mentioned, intersectionality really matters. Gender programs have a risk of being too binary. Women are not all the same. So, for example, younger single women will have different needs to older married women, and we can definitely do more here around understanding the difference for different groups of women, and sharing insights and learning with key stakeholders throughout the program, not waiting till the end, but throughout the program. So for example, we really promote a savings first approach, and so as soon as we get evidence and hear from women that they're starting to save, we will share that with the financial service providers as a way of encouraging them to invest more in savings products and stepping away from loans. And then if we go on to the next slide and look at some of example from one of our programs. So in Bangladesh, we worked with the Gates Foundation and we supported 70 garment factories to digitize their payroll and provided training for the workers, which led to 150,000 workers, majority women, to be paid into accounts. It's their first account, and over 50% reduction in payroll admin for the employers, which made it a really sustainable change. So when the program finished, they continued to pay workers into accounts. And following participation in the training, we saw an increase in men and women saving regularly because they had somewhere safe to keep their money. 1 in 5 women started making joint decisions with their family about saving and spending. And also 1 in 5 men reported the same. So the women went from not being involved to being involved, making decisions with their family, and the men from making individual decisions to making it with their family, which is really great because it meant they met in the middle. And that's one of the kind of really important things about training both men and women and engaging men as allies to support women to increase their agency over their finances. And 1 in 8 women reported being more confident to meet their expected and unexpected expenses. And so I'm just pulling out some of the kind of the learnings from this. So first of all, when the tech is right and with the right support, then women will start to use it and will share with others. So in Bangladesh, many women are internal migrants and have moved to the city for work. And so they want to send money home to their parents in the village. So something like for women like Pushpa, who is here, pictured here, that would mean going to the market in the evening after work or at the weekend. And it's not a comfortable experience. You know, you go and queue up and there's lots of men, and you know, it was something she had to do but didn't really want to do. But now she's learned how to send money from her phone. She can do it at lunch hour. It's so convenient for her. And because it's so useful, she shared that learning with her friends and her family and her neighbours, and we see a ripple effect into the community. And a second key insight I wanted to share is an unintended consequence. So the increase in transparency of being paid into accounts can actually be problematic for some women. So in Bangladesh, some women may be expected to hand over their wages to male family members, and as a coping mechanism have started to hide some of their money. So when they get paid into an account and potentially receive an SMS saying you've been paid such and such amount, that could really expose that they've been doing that and putting them at risk. And so we encourage managers to identify vulnerable workers and give them additional support, including something as simple as deleting an SMS message, making sure that it's their account, they're not using their husband's account, in which case he will then receive that SMS, and you know, deleting it isn't really going to help. But also discouraging financial service providers from sending SMSs like that. But you know, really kind of going into the heart of our program about that kind of shared decision making and openness about finances in kind of a more medium term solution to that. But it just shows it's really important to constantly be collecting data and understanding what's going on. And if you go to the next slide, Annika, and this is the last slide, I just wanted to kind of end on sharing some of the open source materials we've developed, which are available in a range of languages. We have Bangla, Arabic, Khmer, Vietnamese, several Indian languages. We have Hindi, Tamil, Kannada. So we have posters, we've got videos, we've got tech learning tools that are used on tablets, we've got audio messages. As well as practical guides. So they're all on our website. They're actually all on the Her Project website at the moment, but they will be moving to the RISE website when that's launched later this year. So thank you so much for listening, and you know, please do ask any questions in the chat.
Thanks so much, Ella. That was super interesting as usual. Great to see her finances work now pivoting into RISE, as you say. You can be greater than the sum of your parts. Okay, moving on to Inez Murray, who is the CEO of the Financial Alliance for Women. And one of the resources that we profiled in the Gender Intelligent Design Guide, the resource guide that we developed with USAID, is some work that Financial Alliance for Women did around a woman in fintech. So without further ado, over to you, Inez.
Thanks, Katie, and hello, everybody. It's very nice to see you all on the line, and some old friends as well. Okay, so the business case, as we know, for serving women, we talk a lot about the business case at the Alliance. Really, as you all know, has never been better. And you know, there's a lot of figures around, but women are expected to control $216 trillion in wealth globally, and that's a big number. And we also all know the promise of fintech. And I think, you know, you look at the last FinDex results. You've seen really in the last 10 years or so, the massive take up of mobile wallets has been a massive impact in terms of getting more women into the system. And so in 2020, we decided to do some research into fintechs. And what we found was that they're largely myopic so far about the women's market. The vast majority of them don't size that market or track any KPIs by sex. We found that for those that do track performance by sex, that the business case is very compelling, with 64% of them finding that female customers have a similar or higher usage rate than men, and likewise that lifetime value is similar or higher for women. And in 2020, we decided to actually quantify the money that's left on the table by not being gender intelligent in your design. And that's what I'm going to go through today. But first, next slide, please, a little bit about ourselves. So we have 90 members. As Katie mentioned, we're a membership-based trade association. 58 of those members are commercial banks. About 25 are fintechs, and that's a very fast-growing segment for us. And then we have payment companies, insurance, and some NBFCs in India, and a couple of NGOs and so on. So we're growing. We're basically agnostic about location and segment, as long as it's about women and as long as it's about offering not just financial services, but non-financial services. And briefly then, the next slide, please. This is how we essentially work, right? So all our know-how comes from our members. They contribute their information and in-kind contributions. We codify that. We produce a lot of research, as well as and case studies and so on, and how-to guides, but also do a lot of sharing through training and mentoring and so on. And that builds their capacity, which in turn enables them to then become champions and to grow more members by people seeing that it actually matters and you can get great commercial results. So next slide, please. So the gender gap in fintech usage is 27.6%, which means that if for every 100 men that use fintechs, 72 to 73 women are using fintech products. And so that gap is 3 times greater than access to a formal account, whether that is from a bank or a mobile operator. Next slide. The main reasons for this high gender gap are the following. Fintechs focus mainly on unit economics and scale by acquiring early adopters. And many fintechs target young urban men as a default or average early adopter. As a result, the solutions speak to and reach more men than women. The second reason we found was that limited research is done based on understanding of the various user segments, needs, and behaviors. In fact, the vast majority of fintechs do not treat women in any way as a segment when they're looking in terms of research. However, what we know, of course, is, and we have a lot of data from our incumbent members in particular, that women and men process information differently and make decisions differently, particularly when it comes to financial services providers. And these nuances are not considered while designing the user experience for fintechs, and in most cases, it causes more women users to drop off at all stages of the sales funnel. And lastly, from the investor side, the gender lens is either missing or it focuses on women's representation in company leadership and staff from a diversity and inclusion perspective. Not many investors analyze the business metrics with sex disaggregated data to understand the women's market opportunity. So when a fintech is pitching, they're basically to investors. They're telling them how fast they're going to make money and how they're going to make it. But the investor is not querying whether, what's the gender composition or any composition of their user base, right? So it's also a problem from the investor side. Next slide, please. So the research found overall that if conversion rates were equal for men and women through the sales funnel, we could increase revenues by up to 70% for the fintechs. And the sales funnel is at the heart of the business model of fintechs. It's shown here, captures the general, the funnel shown here captures the general stages, although exact steps and terminology will vary from fintech to fintech. The first stage is awareness, and this starts with fintechs launching their solution and promoting their brands to create awareness and curiosity amongst target users. If the language, images, and messaging in the ads don't resonate with women, then women will tune out and not visit the website or the app's landing page. The second stage in the funnel, consideration, focuses on showcasing the product services and making a good first impression amongst users and encouraging users to sign up. The leakage among the female base happens at this stage largely because registration processes are cumbersome. For certain fintechs, such as credit and insurance, there is an additional stage, third step of underwriting as reflected in the approval stage. The leakage in this stage for women users is most likely to happen if there is a bias in the algorithms that negatively affect women's approval rates. For the last stages of usage and loyalty, women are most likely to drop off if the products don't fit their needs, or they're not satisfied with the services, or the fintechs are not engaging with them. Next slide, please. Let's double click on a case to understand how we quantified the money left on the table. So starting with Vital, This is an Indian insurtech that offers customized health insurance plans to individuals. We see in the sales funnel of Vital that women have the same or higher conversion rates than men at each step in the funnel. In fact, contrary to the popular belief that women don't buy insurance, Vital's funnel reveals quite the opposite. Women are 1.5 times more likely to buy insurance than men. However, the challenge lies in attracting more women in the beginning of the funnel. Our analysis confirmed that if Vital is able to attract more women to its platform to a level of 50% of the website visitors, then for every 10,000 new leads, it could generate an additional 12% revenue with the same conversion rates. The next slide will probably be more familiar to the audience, and this is a credit or lending fintech called Cubo Financiero based in Mexico, who offer credit and savings solutions. We analyzed their sales funnel and found two interesting things. Almost the same number of women and men register for loans as the first step in the funnel. And secondly, women and men have similar conversion rates for the next two steps. And then the applications hit Cubo's own credit algorithm. And that's when we start seeing fewer women get approved for loans than men. This is likely due to a bias in the credit algorithm. And by addressing this bias, we estimate that Cubo has the potential to increase its profits margins by 20%. Cubo has already done this, by the way. This research is now 3 years old, but it was a very interesting piece of insight for them. Okay, next slide, please. So by having a gender neutral sales funnel design, money is left on the table at each stage. So let's look briefly, if we go to the next slide, at another couple of stages. The consideration phase is when a user starts filling up the registration form. The registration process can be daunting if the form is too long, language is technical, or questions are vague, and the documentation required is complex. Women are generally more concerned about data privacy and the fine print. By addressing these barriers in the registration process, fintechs can increase their revenues. Now, here's the deal. When a woman sees a form, she will read pretty much every line and word and scroll down right to the bottom, and then she'll click. And because of these forms, they can be very long and arduous. A lot of women actually stop at that stage, whereas a man is much more likely to actually just go down and click, right? So it's simple things like this. In that case, the fintech actually worked with the local regulator to reduce those forms, and that increased more women coming through this through the funnel. In the usage stage, we found that women tend to be less frequent on platforms such as payments. So fintechs can increase their revenue potential if they engage more with their female customer base. And we will share some examples of that. And in the last stage of loyalty, we find that if women customers are satisfied with the products, they provide more referrals and overall generate higher lifetime value compared to male customers. So this is the opportunity for fintechs to increase their organic customer growth rate by as much as 50% through harnessing the power of female referrals. So what are the main fixes? Our study, next slide, please, confirms that it's important to understand the performance of the women's segment by looking at sex disaggregated data at each step of this funnel. It starts with understanding the size of the opportunity. So indicators such as total addressable market and serviceable obtainable market must be disaggregated by sex. Once the traffic hits the platform, sex disaggregated conversion rates at each stage in the funnel helps to identify the friction points or blockages for female users in the funnel. In the report, we see tried and tested approaches adopted by various fintechs that unblock the funnel for women users. Last but most important, it is also important to disaggregate various business metrics by sex. Some of these KPIs are cost of customer acquisition, average revenue per user, churn rate, portfolio at risk, lifetime value. Following these steps to designing a gender intelligent sales model will help fintechs to capture the female economy. Next slide, please. There is one, or is that the last slide? Okay, that's it. We're here to answer any questions you have. We have lots of actual use cases in the reports, and I think they've been put into the chat so that you can go and download them. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Inez. I think it's very interesting. You talking about the long forms and the fine print, because something that we hear time and time throughout the community is that women are not risk averse, they are risk aware. And the likelihood of a man just saying, it'll be fine, check that box, seems to be a lot higher. So a couple of questions. We've got first a question in the chat from Jose Echegoyen at the IFC. And I don't know if either of you have read the latest World Economic Forum report that shows that LAC has surpassed Europe and North America in terms of the years to reach gender parity, close the gender gap. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that or any comments around why that might be.
The gender gap in what? In
Latin America.
No, but gender gap in terms of what? FinTech usage?
I think the gender gap in terms of account ownership, I believe that's correct. But we can perhaps, Jose, you can just if you can clarify that question, we can come back to it. And I wanted to ask you, Ines, just a very quick question. When you say fintech, what does that mean for Financial Alliance for Women? Does that include anyone with a mobile money account? I mean, does that include mobile money? Does that?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically companies. So it's not the banks, the larger banks. It's neobanks, so like Time Bank, South Africa. It's fintechs that are solving. So they're different kind of companies completely to the incumbent.
Not necessarily mobile operators or large banks.
Usually they're not MTOs either, at least in our network. So these ones, all of these interviews were done with smaller fintechs. Sure.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the investors that you work with, that these partners, these members work with, mm-hmm. I'm wondering if, in terms of them starting to click on and see the business case for women, when did you see them starting to put forward criteria around, including women and making sure that there was data or research that backed up their propositions for women?
So this research was done in 2021, and the interviews were done with impact investors as well as regular investors in Silicon Valley. And at that time, the Black Lives Matter movement was at its peak, perhaps, certainly very strong in North America. And the idea of representation of different of people of color was and representation on the teams was much stronger in terms of that's what they were caring about, rather than women representation. So they care about so that's representation on the leadership teams, right? Nobody or very few are looking at actually the women's market. Right. So it's not really part of their. So what we do is then we're pretty small, but what we do is we try to push out reports like this and get investors in the room. We run FinTech Fridays where we have the investors and FinTechs talk about different issues and so on. And basically kind of build the awareness, because it's not for any, one could argue that there may be some unconscious bias involved, both at the fintech level and the investor level. For most likely that is true, but at the same time, once they're aware that there's an opportunity, it's a completely different story. Like I was at the Inclusive FinTech Forum last week in Rwanda, and that is kind of like a replication of the Singapore FinTech Festival, but the attempt is to make Rwanda kind of a fintech hub in Africa, and the panel on women's markets and women representation. So basically, women in fintech, it was called, was very well received. Absolutely, the fintech community is very open. I find they're very. A lot of them are very clever. It's just they had never thought about it. Honestly, it's just like wow. It's not even that there's prejudice, which there would be. We did research in 2014 in the top 30 banks. And that's a different story. They're much more, women, all they need, if there's anything that they need, it's like pink products, or there's no data to support the business case, or women tend to be in smaller businesses, they're too expensive to serve, that kind of thing. So that's what we found in 2014 with the fintech community. Even through the research and interviews, they started unpacking and started looking at the data. And that's why we were able to write the case study on Time Bank, was they actually started looking at the data as a result of interaction with us, and that yielded a whole lot of really cool insight that they've then taken forward. And they have currently 53% of their customers are female in South Africa, and they have about 7 million customers currently. But they have products that are much more used by women than men. What they've done is they've basically made a huge effort now to, and it's not that hard, by the way. It's much easier for a fintech to disaggregate data than it is for a bank, as we all know, because of all those legacy systems. But once you do that, you can identify opportunity and see women's behaviors and men's behaviors and so on. So, making those comparisons is super important.
Maybe if I could just add to that as well, with the fintechs and financial service providers that we work with have kind of gone from, women aren't that interested. That's why they're not signing up to these products, to kind of going, oh, okay, now we understand that actually the reason why they're not signing up is because they don't have a SIM card registered in their own name, or things like that. So that's where that kind of sharing, that continual learning with them, to take them to that kind of aha moment, to think, oh, well, actually, if I change this, then I will get more customers. But also that constant vigilance of kind of finding out what's the next issue. At the moment, one of the things is this one-click loan, which to me feels very concerning, and kind of encouraging that kind of savings first approach, but developing savings products and demonstrating that if there is a savings product and women have got trust to be able to access their money when they need it, then they will start using savings products and keeping their money in the bank, which is, makes them an attractive customer.
Yeah, I think that when we've thought about women's financial inclusion, and particularly digital financial inclusion, there's always been this very misguided idea that if you build it, they will come, and that doesn't really work when there's no use case. And the use case for men is different to the use case for women, and as soon as we can really start to design for the sort of the constraints and the challenges and the opportunities, I think that's where we start to see movement. Now, I am aware of time, but I'm thinking we can answer perhaps one more question from Niloufer Ahmed at MCC. Inez, how can we reduce the gender bias in the algorithm? Which countries require? This is a big question. So maybe some high-level thoughts on reducing the gender bias in the algorithm, if that's something that you feel comfortable answering. Yeah,
sure. So we've had some deep dives on this within our own network and beyond. So the main issues are the questions that are asked that are related to structural biases, right? So your income, your education, those two questions really prejudice you in terms of, so women would be, generally speaking, there's lots of different trends, but generally speaking, at this income population, women are less educated and they have less income. And so if you unpack that bias, but also you complement that with alternative data sources that actually can illustrate how well women are doing. And so what we're seeing, for instance, is integrating, we have Juancho de Presta in Colombia, integrating, for instance, for taxi drivers, geo mapping data, which shows that where they're going in the city, what kind of business they have, frequency, pickup, and all this kind of stuff can then inform the credit decisioning process. So it's really about looking, but this is a huge problem. Like, for instance, MasterCard, we had their chief data officer speak to us a couple of years ago at our summit, And what they're doing is they have to basically, so it's not just gender bias, it's every kind of bias you can imagine that's in the core of the data that these companies have access to begin with. So what they do is they look at their data pool and they basically decide, because once the algorithm learns, it's learning in a biased way, right? So and it keeps reinforcing the bias. So what they have to do is run alternative data pools and correct for that bias and self-correct and constantly look at this. And it's, as I said, it's not just about women, it's loads of different, what ethnicity you are, you name it. There's loads of ways that these biases are coming into the system. So, but for simplicity's sake, women should, on biasing, women are never really rewarded for the fact they're paying back the loans more. So why on the one hand are they being penalized because they have less money or less education, but the other hand, they're not being rewarded for the fact that they're paying back the loans more. So it's really about asking the fintechs to take a look at the data. And that's why we made it so simple, was like, look at your sales funnel, disaggregate the data, and just start asking the questions. And usually you're working with people that are bright enough to understand. But there was another question about best practice and use cases.
Could you answer it in just a minute?
What I think is super, super key, and I've seen a lot of success, is to have a great field game. You need, like what Time has, are ambassadors, physical people next to their kiosks, or you see to help women on board the system, right? Or you see Shiro's in India. It's a community already of 25 million women. And after they created this community, established digital storefronts, networks, put in bits of education, this, that, and the other, magazine type format. After they built the trust, which is what women need, after they built that, then they layered in the financial services. So it's that community building and trust is super, super important to begin with. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Now we're going to move into an interactive activity. And so what we're going to do now is everyone is going to go into groups of around 8 people. Daniel's going to put you into those groups. And each group is going to be given a scenario. And the scenario sort of paints out a challenge for designing a product or service that needs to be designed for a specific group. The group's task will then be to understand, what they know around women in this situation, what they need to know to inform the design of products and services or other solutions. And also what assumptions that you think you're making. So what data you have, what data you need, and what data you think you possibly but perhaps you're misguided. And then we're going to, after about 10 minutes, Annika and I will pop into each group and give you a further data set and some detail about this assumed customer. So you'll be asked to kind of assess the situation again and see, where there are still knowledge gaps, what else you need to know to begin the design process. Do you need qualitative data? Do you need quantitative data? How are you going to go about getting that data? How will you know if the products are being used post-launch, and how will you get feedback on this? So thinking about that, we're going to put you into groups of around 8 people. So there should be 10-ish groups. And we're going to set you up with this task. So groups 1 to 5 will be looking at digitizing women-headed poultry farming in Ghana, and groups 6 to 10 will be looking at introducing an insurance product in Zambia. Unfortunately, it is going to be down to dumb luck which group you end up in. But we'll hopefully have time for a bit of a share out afterwards. We'll have after 10 minutes, we'll pop back in and give you the data, but we'll share the scenarios as soon as you're in your groups. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome back, and thank you so much for taking part in that exercise. There were some really dynamic conversations going on and some super interesting and in-depth lines of questioning. We don't have time for a full report out, but I am going to just ask Nikita, as soon as I find her on this list, to just discuss, actually, as soon as Daniel, you might be able to help me make Nikita a speaker. But just to briefly discuss, what their line of questioning was, and how they went about thinking about the question, which was, I believe they had scenario 1. Let's see, is Nikita a speaker?
Hi, Kathy. Yeah,
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, hi, everyone. So the situation which we were given was that to increase mobile literacy and mobile wallets for the women in Ghana. So some of the questions as a consultant, which we thought through, are that first one being, do the women actually have mobile phones and bank accounts? The second one being, is the cultural connotation of the place, whether the phones are allowed to women there or not. That is a very big question which we can't ignore, and that has to be answered. The third one being, do women have the digital literacy there, so that they can use the mobile wallets, and their education levels, digital literacy really matter for mobile wallets to work in any place, in any territory. The fourth one being access to internet, whether the region access to internet or not. So promoting mobile literacy, digital literacy is very nice, but do they have the basic infrastructure to get such help is also a question which a consultant needs to ask. Then, do they have any threats with the online payments in their accounts? Like one of the speakers clearly told and explained to us that if all the payments are given in the bank account and then a message comes on their phone, what kind of threats do they have? Like whether all the payments has to be taken by the husband, and what are their chances to save the money then? So whether the digital literacy, mobile wallets are a boon for them or a bane for them, that has to be really answered. And
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Nikita. I hate to cut you off. That was very, it was great to hear the way you had approached the scenario. I don't want to take up more than people's time. Thank you so much for staying on for this 90 minutes. I really enjoyed engaging with you all in through the small discussion groups. Thank you to Inez Murray and to Ella Moffat for their participation and sharing of their great insights. We are going to be sharing all of this out, including the resources that Ella and Inez discussed in their presentations, as well as their slides. We'll be sure to update the group with all these recordings and resources. As you sign out, you're going to be presented with a survey. We'd love you to fill it out if you can spare us 30 seconds. But I'll let you all go, and just thank you so much for joining. We really, really enjoyed these conversations, and I think that they were very, they were very thoughtful and really fascinating to see how everyone approached their scenarios in different ways. So thank you to those in Asia. Have a lovely evening. To those in Europe, time for your afternoon coffee, and for those in DC, probably time for a coffee also. And for those elsewhere, your drink of choice. See you later, everyone.